prophecy about Jesus' birth. This one is from Jeremiah 23, verses 5 and 6. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell trustingly. And this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. In John 10, Jesus tells a parable where he refers to himself as the good shepherd. And at one point he says, the sheep will follow him, for they know his voice. Something about Jesus' voice elicits trust. Not merely the tone, which I think of too sometimes at first, but the content. What he says is right or righteous, and it strikes a chord in our heart that no other voice touches. I've shared with you all on previous occasions how I had this prodigal period when I was very young, and then as I was getting to the end of it, I had read the whole New Testament. And I hadn't understood very much of it, especially the writings of Paul and all, but I did get this overall impression from reading it. And that impression was that everything Jesus said and did was right, especially in contrast to the way that I had been trying to live those last few years before that, where I was hiding behind certain images I was trying to project about myself, and then hiding and escaping through use of drugs. So the contrast between that and Jesus always saying and doing what was right was so striking. The world can seem to be a dark and scary place, but Jesus' coming was the advent of trust. Something greater is going on in life than we can see. And we can share in this greater work of God, even with others around us. That's what our text lifts up for us, is once again we see a prophecy about Jesus' birth. The Lord will raise up a descendant of David. Now there's two different images depending on the translation. In the original Hebrew, it calls him, this descendant, a righteous branch. And not really picturing a full-grown branch, but more a new growth or sprout. And so we get this idea of new life springing up, seems to come from that, the Hebrew version of that. There was a Greek translation a couple hundred years of the Old Testament, a couple hundred years before Jesus was born, and there it calls this descendant of David a righteous rising or dawn. And there we get the idea more of a new day. So on the one hand, a new life that's springing up and sprouting, and the other, a new day that's dawning. And I think those are complementary images in a way. And for both of them, this descendant is a king, it says, who will reign and understand and make judgment and righteousness upon the earth. He rules and understands in a deeper way. And because he does that, he can decide rightly, whereas our decisions, more often than not, are not truly what's right in God's eyes. But he sees things in a deeper way. God calls this king, the Lord is our righteousness. That's the name that he actually carries, according to Jeremiah. Because he's this one who always does what is right, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell trustingly. A deep trust comes upon the people, Jeremiah says, because of who this one is. We trust him. We trust what he says. And so we begin to believe that life is the way that he says it is, instead of the way we simply imagine it to be. We're told by him that our lives can help share his word and his voice with others around us, so that it can bring a trust into their hearts as well. Let's hear an example from Cynthia Lovely. We were a motley group of carolers, she said, as we met at a little white church in Albany, New York on Christmas Eve. An interesting mix of backgrounds with little in common, but having the common thread of wanting to serve Jesus. Just 12 people, there was an unease that settled over them. After all, they were in the inner city, a crime and drug-ridden neighborhood. This is where they were going to carol. The pastor was a large man who had a big accordion that he was going to be playing. Cynthia's husband was a music minister, and he brought a saxophone along, and the other 10 would just be singing along with the musicians. The group started going from house to house. Very few responses at first. People refused to open their doors to strangers. Some were peeking through the window curtains. Eventually, maybe a porch light would come on and there'd be a tentative wave through the window at the carolers. Finally, after many houses, a door opened, and the little children and the mother asked if they could join the group and could go around and help with the singing. And of course, they said yes to that. A group of curious onlookers started to gather around just to watch and see what was going on here. More children emerged. Children who were never on the street at night because they might run into a drug deal or a random gunshot or even be part of an abduction. But this evening was different, Cynthia said. Somehow our little church group had chased away the shadowy figures. The children sensed the difference, and they reveled in the freedom. Excitement grew. There were black, white, Hispanic, adults, children, yet everyone was together. The children started asking requests, and it wasn't just Christmas carols, but Frosty the Snowman, Jingle Bells, and other songs. After about 5 or 6 requests, Cynthia's husband began playing his saxophone during this pause that had settled. He started playing a soulful rendition of Silent Night. The adults grew quiet. Even the children hushed. The notes rang out beautifully in this rough and hurting neighborhood. People braved the frigid winter air and stood on their porches to watch and listen. At that moment, Cynthia said, the atmosphere of danger dispersed, and the light and perfect peace of Jesus Christ settled upon the block. All became still, in perfect accord with the words of the song, Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm and all is bright. After the last note, silence lingered for a moment, till eventually one child whispered something to the parents, then another child started to whisper, and eventually conversation returned. As the group left, an older woman came out of her door with tears in her eyes. In all my years of living in this neighborhood, no one has ever come to Christmas carol here. God bless you. Cynthia said lights were now illuminating the streets. Neighbors called out greetings to each other. All because a small group had asked God to work through them. His peace prevailed, she said. His love flowed freely, and for a moment, trust reigned. Something in Jesus' voice elicits trust. Everything he says and does is right and righteous. He strikes a chord in our hearts that no one else can. The world can seem to be a dark and a scary place, but Jesus' coming is the advent of trust. So may we hear his voice always, and may we share our lives so that others may hear his voice as well and experience his trust.